I am the neighbourhood watchman for an isolated hamlet in the Scottish Highlands. I was desperate when I accepted the position. There were no jobs in Carlisle, so I broadened my search, and the following listing caught my eye. Neighbourhood watchman, £31,000 per annum, 7 days a week, midnight to 4 AM. Civil service, includes residence for employee and family. Relevant experience preferred. Relevant experience baffled me, because I'd never heard of a paid neighbourhood watchman before. But when I received an email from Harriet Glade to say that I had been accepted for the position, I was ecstatic. We packed up and drove to Scotland. My two children, Rory and Grace, were a little disappointed that we were not moving to Edinburgh or Glasgow. They were even more disappointed when they first laid eyes on the place that would become our home. The job title made complete sense. I was to be a neighbourhood watchman because this hamlet was merely a residential street in the middle of nowhere. A row of 6 terraced houses stood along one side of a country road. Beside those, there was a small convenience shop, and just beyond that was a gargantuan house. Our house. My children perked up when they saw the building. My wife gasped. I gasped. It was spectacular. 3 stories tall, and it overlooked the forest a few hundred yards away. Between us and the wooded area, a 70-foot tall watchtower loomed above the hamlet. "This is cool. I forgive you, Dad," Grace said. I laughed and my wife kissed me on the cheek as everybody clambered out of the vehicle. "You must be the Graysons," a voice called. I closed the car door and turned to face a short, elderly Scottish woman. She scurried towards me and extended an eager hand. "Harriet Glade," the woman said. "The house is beautiful." "Aye, and Kieran has assured me that the inside is ship-shape," Harriet said. My wife walked over to introduce herself. "Faye Grayson," she said, shaking Harriet's hand. "Nice to meet you, Faye." "How do you feel about living in such an isolated place?" Harriet asked. "It'll take some adjusting," Faye said, clasping her hand around mine. "But I'll be fine. I work from home." "Oh, aye. When the internet's working, so do I," Harriet chuckled. "Do you mind if I ask something?" I blurted out. "Go ahead," Harriet replied. "This is a civil job, and you work for the council," I said. "Aye, that's right," Harriet replied, nodding. "I deal with administrative matters." "Why is this position so important to them?" I asked. "I'm not complaining about being hired for such a well-paid job, but it's a sizable investment from a town council." "I suppose it's time to talk about your role," Harriet said, waving for me to follow her. "I'll take the kids inside," Faye said. "Have you got the keys?" "Door's unlocked, dearie. Keys are on the table," Harriet explained. I remember thinking that such a lackadaisical attitude seemed out of place for a hamlet with its own watchtower. "Don't worry, I only unlocked it this morning," Harriet said, reading my mind. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Kieran's shop. We use it as a town hall when the need arises," Harriet explained. "He's the mayor of this hamlet, you might say. He supplies the food, he fixes broken things, and he makes the final call on all decisions." She led me into the store, which was deceptively spacious. In the centre of the room there was a clearing with 12 chairs, and upon our arrival, a middle-aged man with a bushy beard rose to his feet. "Darren!" the man roared jubilantly, raising his arms in a welcoming gesture. "It's nice to finally meet you. I'm Kieran Green, and these are your neighbours." "Hi," a young woman sheepishly chirped up, raising a hand. I'm Lottie. This is my husband, David. We have 3 wee ones at home. They're very excited to meet your weens. Weens? I asked. The room erupted with laughter. English folk, Harriet chuckled, and she smiled at me. A ween is a child. Oh, right, I said, laughing awkwardly. Yeah, I've got 2 children. Sorry about that. The rest of the people in the room introduced themselves, other than 2 silent, sinister-looking boys. And that just leaves these stoic teenagers, Kieran said, motioning towards the 2 fearsome chaps who were sitting with their arms crossed. These are my boys. Barry on the left, Richard on the right. They help me out at the store, but they don't talk much. It's nice to meet all of you, I stammered. That's a lot of names. Kieran chuckled, sitting back down. I know this is all quite overwhelming. And it's not even what you want to know, is it? I laughed uncomfortably, shrugging. Kieran nodded, removing his glasses, polishing them with the bottom of his leather jacket, then placing them back on his face. This is a quiet road, Darren, and on it you'll find a good place with good people. Kieran stopped, his lip trembling. But we're surrounded by bad things. My new neighbours murmured and nodded their heads in agreement. I see that the watchtower overlooks the forest, I said. Is there something dangerous in there? Kieran paused for a long time. Aye, you could say that. I thought all of the deadly wildlife in Britain was exterminated centuries ago, I replied. Well, yes, but... Kieran hesitated. You wouldn't believe me, even if I were to tell you. I was a little exasperated at this point. What exactly does my job entail? I know I only have to sit in a watchtower, but when would I sound the alarm, so to speak? You'd know, Kieran promised. But I hope it doesn't come to that. He swiftly changed the topic by offering tea and biscuits to everyone. I didn't know much about Scottish wildlife, but I knew it wasn't particularly threatening. I couldn't see why a tiny hamlet would need a watchman to spot deer or Highland cows. I was terrified on my first night, so it was anticlimactic when nothing happened. And nothing happened for months. Well, a wild boar ran out of the forest in quite a state. I shooed it back. That was 20 minutes of excitement. I was on watch 7 days a week. Faye didn't mind, because my hours were short. Midnight to 4 AM. £31,000 a year. Fantastic. I had plenty of time to spend with my family, though I would sleep until midday. I want to join you in the watchtower, I remember Rory saying as I tucked him into bed. It's boring up there, I promised. Sometimes from our window I watch the forest with you, Grace said, as I knelt down to kiss her goodnight. I smiled. Don't worry, I won't tell your mum that you were out of bed. Thanks, Grace replied. Could you tell Harriet though? I'm basically doing the same job as you, and I wouldn't mind a £31,000 salary. I cackled until my eyes brimmed with water. Still, Grace's words rang true. What was I doing? Why was I being paid so much for it? I kept dismissing it as a bureaucratic oversight, and continued to happily collect my money. But I didn't like the idea of performing a pointless service. Am I just doing nothing every day? I asked Faye. Are you forgetting the global pandemic? Half the world is trapped at home. They're doing nothing, my wife pointed out. This is a blessing, Darren. We've landed on our feet. Look at this amazing house. We wouldn't have ever been able to buy this place, even if we'd combined our salaries. How many people get such an incredible opportunity? Faye always had a way of soothing me. On a particularly warm night in the summer of 2020, she found a way to liven up my watch. The kids were having a sleepover with the 3 youngsters at Lottie's house, and Faye kept me company in the watchtower. As we were getting dressed, I looked out of the glass pane that overlooked the forest. The blood drained from my face. Standing a few yards from the tree line was a man, or something that looked like a man. It had contorted its limbs outwards, assuming the stance of a 4-legged creature. But whatever I saw, I know it saw me too. And when it sensed my gaze, it immediately scurried backwards. "Did you see that?" I asked Faye. "What, are you worried someone was watching?" my wife teased before clambering down the ladder and returning to the house. I was more vigilant than usual over the following weeks. Those 4 hours started to feel ceaseless. I would keep my eyes glued to the forest. Even blinking felt like a luxury I could not afford. I was actually working at long last, and I was exhausted. Fear had fatigued me. By December, I decided that enough was enough. I needed to start getting some proper sleep. And so I started to relax on my shifts. It was just an animal, I decided. As the temperature plummeted below freezing and the snow began to fall, the daily watch grew more brutal. And then, on one shift, I was shivering in my poorly insulated room at the top of the watchtower, observing white flecks cascading from the sky and obscuring my view of the forest. I saw something. An ocean of snow had entirely coated the treetops and the ground below, but it could not conceal the swarm of jet-black shapes emerging from the forest. I felt my soul vacate my body. I hadn't imagined the creature at all. It was real, and it wasn't alone. Crooked limbs marched through the dense sea of snow. 6 indiscernible shapes were heading towards our hamlet. As I fumbled in the pocket of my thick coat for the walkie-talkie, I saw that the creatures were huddling together and making their way towards my tower.
"Kieran!"
I cried into the device.
"Are you there? There's some sort of animal coming out of the forest."
His response was instant.
"Understood, Darren. Thank you for the warning. I need you to abandon your post and meet me in my store."
I didn't need to be told twice. As I practically slid down the ladder from my tower, I squinted at the creatures through the thick waterfall of snowflakes in the sky. But I didn't stick around. My curiosity was weaker than my will to live. I waded through white muck, fixating my eyes on Kieran's shopfront and refusing to look back. I neared the front door, trying to tune out the sound of snow heavily crunching beneath hands, feet, or whatever appendages the things were using to walk. Kieran was motioning for me to hurry up, and he practically threw me inside once I reached the doorway. He bolted the door behind me. Thankfully, I realised that my family was there. Everybody from the hamlet was there. Faye, Rory and Grace ran towards me, and I embraced them. "What's happening?" Faye whispered. "Everybody needs to follow Barry and Richard to the back of the shop," Kieran ordered. The emotionless brothers nodded and started to lead the small group of residents to the door behind the till. "Not you, watchman," Kieran said, grabbing my wrist before I could join my family. Faye stopped and turned to face me. Richard grabbed her arm and shook his head. He insisted that my wife follow him. I heard her continue to ask what was happening as Barry closed the door and locked it. He and his brother stayed in the main shop area with Kieran and me. "Look," Kieran said, and I did. Outside the shop window was a blanket of snow and darkness. There was a long, glorious moment of silence. Then, from the void before us, the creatures emerged. I could finally see them clearly. My eyes had not deceived me. They were half human, stripped bare, bodies coated in mud, and limbs bent outwards. As the first creatures reached the road, I saw that their eyes lacked pupils. Their mouths were open, and their teeth appeared to have been sharpened. "What are they?" I asked in a breathless voice. "Do you see why you wouldn't have believed me?" Kieran asked. "Folks say something happened in one of the old factories 30 years ago. Truth is that we don't know. But every once in a blue moon we see them. This is sooner than I expected. Before the last sighting, 2 years ago, we hadn't seen them for 20 years. I paused, unable to think. What do we do? There's only one thing that appeases them, Kieran said. The sudden thump on the right side of my face was certainly unexpected. I fell to the floor, clutching my wounded jaw, and I looked up at Kieran. "I'm sorry, lad," he said. "Other than my boys, nobody quite understands how it works. They don't know how we managed to survive. A sacrifice. That's what it takes. The last watchman died, bravely fighting the beasts. But he didn't really fight. He was their meal. That's why they left. And now, we've found another watchman to take his place. The new hero." "You're crazy," I said, crawling backwards across the floor. As Kieran menacingly strolled towards me, I looked out of the shop window on my left. The creatures were standing in the road. They were waiting patiently. "I have people to protect in my hamlet. One life is not worth 20, Kieran said, growing flustered. "Look, I'll make sure your family has enough money for life. Do this for them, Darren." I twisted my head to the right, looking for something in the store that I could use to defend myself. "And don't think about calling to your family, okay?" Kieran warned. "Otherwise, my boys might just let them out, and the creatures might be treated to a bigger meal." I had an idea, but I had to act quickly. "Okay, let's start," Kieran said, clearing his throat. "What are you doing, Watchman? Don't go out there. That's suicide. Please, you don't need to prove anything to us. We can fight the creatures together." Whilst Kieran busied himself with his unhinged performance, I grabbed a heavy porcelain vase from the shelf next to me and launched it with all of my might at the shop window. It shattered, and the man's eyes widened. His boys froze on the spot. Nobody had time to think. In under a second, one of the creatures had crawled through the broken window with inhuman agility. The beast sank its teeth into Kieran's neck, claiming its trophy. The shopkeeper wailed, gargling blood in his mouth, as the creature dragged him over broken glass into the night. Richard and Barry paid no attention to me. They charged blindly after their father. I pulled myself to my feet and quietly backed towards the door behind the till. I didn't dare take my eyes off the creatures, but they were a little busy. Richard was faster than Barry. He swung his fist at one of the monsters that was dragging his father away, but he fell flat on the snow-covered road, and before the boy even had a chance to stand up, 2 of the creatures had set upon him. They frantically dug their pincer-like limbs into his body. I cannot quite describe the sound of agony that escaped his mouth as a cavity was created in his back, and his blood began to paint the snow. All I will say is that the sound was short-lived. The creatures continued to hack away at his corpse until it was an indistinguishable pile of crushed organs and bones in the snow. Barry's fate was worse. His father had been dragged away at this point, but once the surviving brother had pulled himself free from a state of stasis, he charged through the broken shop window to avenge his brother. 2 of the creatures had disappeared into the forest with Kieran's body. The 4 remaining beasts surrounded Barry, and when they pounced, they knocked him into the snow. Each of the monstrosities seized a limb, and moving in 4 different directions, the horrific creatures pulled at Barry's arms and legs. They pulled until the flesh started to tear, and the bones started to splinter. Barry's screams were so visceral, they haunt my dreams to this day. Then, in beautifully terrible synchronicity, all 4 limbs detached from Barry's torso at once. Like the most macabre choreography imaginable, the creatures brought their dance to a close. At this point, realising I was the only one left, I fumbled with the door handle behind the till. I heard my family crying inside, but I realised one of the brothers had the key. I turned to face the open shop window, preparing to meet my demise. By some strange twist of fate, however, the creatures ignored me and followed their deformed friends back into the forest. I never told the people of my hamlet what Kieran had done to the previous watchman. I didn't want them to know that the poor man had died unwillingly. I didn't want them to know that Kieran had planned the same for me. Then again, am I any better? I offer the creatures a sacrifice after all. I know I should leave this place. I should take my family and run. But I can't leave these people to a terrible fate. The creatures will return, whether 1 year or 10 years from now. When that happens, what will I do?